Welcome everyone to episode number 5 of Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. My name is Amanda Kelly, and I am the host of these weekly podcasts where we'll be tackling topics of safety with a focus on achieving that highest standard of abuse prevention and protection for the vulnerable sector. Today's podcast is going to look a little bit different. We are going to be breaking it up into 2 different sections. So today we are going to be covering the topic of online engagement, and we're going to go through the first 5 tips that Melodie has for promoting a very safe environment for online engagement. And then next week we'll tackle those other 5 tips. So Melodie and I are back today. Hi Melodie, how are you doing today?
Hi, Amanda. I'm well. I'm healthy, which I'm really, really grateful for. I'm loving doing these podcasts. You are an amazing host. Love working with you on these. Thank you so much, Amanda. Someone asked me the other day how much time I spend in meetings, especially online, like Zoom meetings. And I think this week I'm about 30 hours.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. And I definitely am aware because whenever we check the calendar, it's on every given day. There's like 6 to 7 things of you just meeting. But it seems like everyone's online these days, especially with the social distancing restrictions that we've had placed on us since March. So actually that works as a really good lead into our topic today. So last week we talked on a little bit of a higher note. We talked about higher risk activities. So we shared a ton of different stories and came up with quite the list of high risk activities. And Melodie, you also provided us with 8 really fantastic tips for avoiding, sharing, and reducing and transferring those risks. So today we're going to shift and we're going to be answering the following question. During COVID, we have moved all of our activities online. Do we put our abuse prevention program on hold during this time? Actually, Melodie, we've heard from, hundreds of our members and clients that they've taken their programs online. That seems to be the new normal these days. And really, it is the safest option in terms of health and avoiding the spread of the virus. But what a lot of people aren't aware is that it also introduces a whole plethora of new risks, which a lot of people are genuinely unaware of.
You're right. We have heard about so many different activities online. And even myself, I've taken some of my volunteer activities online. So we've heard of schools, teachers that are teaching now online, live stream sermons online, prayer meetings online, day camps, youth groups, youth hotlines, online support groups, crisis support groups, counseling online, mentoring online, life coaching, e-learning, remote learning, pen pals, communicating from around the world, now online. Video games have always been online. Planning and committee meetings involving a whole generation, of individuals online. I've even done a book club online.
I love that. And it's really, really great to see that so many people are still engaging with each other and with the youth and continuing their work and ministry, with kids. And I'm sure it's been really hard for people, especially, having to stay at home, not seeing friends, missing their communities. I've actually recognized that a lot of organizations have been really, really resilient. They made a very quick shift to be able to offer these online. Sometimes it may have been too quick without recognizing that there are a ton of other risks that need to be addressed. But as the vulnerable sectors stay at home, to protect their health, there are children and adults that are even at a higher risk of abuse these days at home. I've seen a ton upon a ton of different articles over the last few months about the rising risk of abuse because children and youth, they're being stuck in those unsafe households. So I really want to just take a minute. I want to encourage everyone to really be watching with their eyes and their ears to be looking for those indicators of abuse. And even though the child might not be directly in front of you, that means you have to be paying attention even more. You have to listen to the stories that they're telling you of what happened during isolation, what they're going through. Watch for things like changes in behavior. And if you discover that children or a youth have been abused, and you believe that they are in need of protection, then you do need to still contact Child and Family Services. That duty does not lift from you, no matter what the circumstance is these days. These indicators, they might seem easy to overlook, especially when we are talking about an online setting. So that's why you have to put in the extra effort. It's a larger challenge to be able to notice these. So, check and monitor the conduct of these children and these youth that are, taking part in your activities, and make this one of your highest priorities.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that, Amanda. That's something I remind people all the time. They just say that the pandemic has just fueled the opportunity for people to abuse children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and the elderly. We've seen that in some of the long-term care homes. The pandemic has certainly increased the prevalence of abuse. And engaging with people during COVID-19 using online tools poses the risk of increasing the pandemic of child abuse that we have been fighting for so many years. The pandemic of child abuse has already impacted 25% of our global population, and the numbers have only increased during a pandemic.
That's absolutely heartbreaking to hear, to be honest. We have consistently told people of the risks that are present, in-person activities, in their in-person programming, whether that be off-site or even in your organization building. But before this shift to online platforms, we didn't really have to address what those dangers of the online community are. So actually, Melody, it's a great question for you. What are some of those potential risks of the internet and of this growing technology?
Well, we've had an opportunity to do a lot of training around this over the last 5, 6 months, and I see the risks fall in three categories: content, contact, and conduct. So those three: the content it delivers, the instant contact it provides with others, and the conduct that youth online may do that could cause harm or to others. We'll dive into this much deeper in the next few minutes, but I'll give you some examples of content, contact, and conduct risks.
So, sorry, when you're referring to content risks, are you referring to teaching inappropriate content?
Well, one of the areas of risks that exist in technology is the content it delivers. Your child could be the recipient of violent, hateful content, pornography, or unwelcome sexual content, biased, racist, or misleading information, or spam. Minors can be exposed to inappropriate materials online. For example, receiving sexually explicit text, photos, or videos. Someone could groom or lure them for sexual exploitation, but they're seeing them often face to face or certainly on a screen. They could view sexually explicit or inappropriate websites, content, or apps.
So that could also even go ahead and include things like losing control of photos and videos, intellectual property, bullying, harassment, discrimination, griefing, or trolling, and even a harm to reputation. So as we talk about that as well, would you be able to address that second risk?
Okay, the second risk that exists in technology is the contact it provides with others. Your child could be a participant in tracking or harvesting personal information, being bullied, harassed, or stalked, meeting strangers, or being groomed online or self-harm. Minors can be bullied or harassed by someone that's called cyberbullying. We're going to talk more about this in a bit. connecting online, relationships that start online progress much faster when they are online. This can lead to desires to meet up or send inappropriate or intimate photos. They can be talked into sending photos of themselves or private information. Teens may not even perceive the threat or need for safety. They say that 1 in 5 children using online chat room games or websites will be approached by a pedophile within just seconds.
That's crazy to think about. That in just moments they can absolutely be approached by a predator. Okay, so then what's the third type of risk?
The third risk in technology is the conduct of youth online that cause harm to themselves or another person. Your child could be the actor in illegal downloading, hacking, gambling, financial scams, bullying others, creating or uploading inappropriate material, or providing misleading information or advice. The first conduct risk is the risk to break social or emotional boundaries. Since they can interact without face-to-face exchanges, there is a removal of some of the social cues that help guide appropriate behavior. This moves inhibitions and can lead youth to cross social boundaries. For example, to engage in bullying and sexting, which is a big problem these days.
A huge problem. So, actually, if parents are listening, I want to make the following recommendations. So, you should establish what looks like a family contract regarding, time limits and appropriate use of internet and technology. So, establish age-appropriate, consistent guidelines, and that will help everyone know what's expected of them and what they're allowed to do. Also, start surfing the internet with your children when they're first learning, so then you can teach your children how to actually be using it appropriately. Place computers and other technology in family-friendly open rooms, such as a living room instead of a bedroom, so you're providing a lot of supervision, which is needed. You can even install and use computer monitoring software that'll allow you to track websites and chat rooms and emails. Then you can let your children know that you're going to be using it and you will be checking it. Be aware of when children are sending images, videos, photos, or even using webcams. Make sure that children know that they shouldn't use personal information or give out any personal information ever. No exceptions. Keep a close eye on your credit card bills and make sure that children are not using them because children are very tech savvy. They will figure it out.
Good. I wish I knew all those things when I was just a young parent like you were. Way to go. I so agree. Please, 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 parents, don't let your kids be online unsupervised, but provide really close, direct supervision. With my own children, I made sure that when they started online, Facebook, whatever social platform they were on, if they were there, I befriended them. I was one of their friends on the internet. That's when I first got online, as soon as my kids were online. We established family rules and had hard to guess passwords that should be used for technology. That should be, parents should know all those passwords. The passwords should be changed often. Be the keeper of the passwords, not your children. You be the keeper of the passwords. You should know your child's passwords for all technology and all sites.
So let's make a little bit of a shift toward providing programs online. So, what kind of advice would you be giving them? What are your concerns? What are you seeing and what do you hear?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of stories. Just even in the last few months, I have had phone calls from clients, from members that have told me about Zoom bombing. They've been in the middle of a service and someone has come in and started doing hateful speech, and people who have posed great risk to the organization and even political speech. We've heard about a lot of grooming online. I even heard about an 8-year-old girl who was on a Zoom call, similar to what you and I are on right now, Amanda. And the girl was playing with the backdrops. You know how you can change the back image for on Zoom? And she was on her father's computer. It was a Sunday school class. She was only 8 years old. She was playing with the backdrop images, and she put up a pornographic picture that was on her father's computer. She freaked as soon as she saw the picture. She didn't know how to respond quick enough, so she literally ran out of the room, which left just the pornographic picture up. The Sunday school teachers were very young. They had a whole group of kids online on the Zoom call. And so it took a few minutes to be able to quickly exit the call, close down the Sunday school class. But these are some of the stories I'm hearing about.
And it happens pretty often, actually. I'll be just scrolling through my own personal social media and I'll be seeing people sharing their stories about being Zoom bombed or of people not really knowing the capabilities of these online platforms and which ends up being quite detrimental. So in that case of not really knowing what she was sharing and not understanding, and then also even not having restrictions placed on that call to allow those that are attending to only be able to do certain things. So that is something that absolutely should be looked at well before actually starting a video call. We've actually distributed over 1,000 complimentary copies of our online engagement policy just over the last 4 months. So how about we take a little bit of time to share some of those really key points from that policy to reflect some of those best practices when doing these online video calls and online engagement.
Well, before we begin sharing, I just want to give you a little bit of background to the stages that we took to identify these best practices and the tips that are in our policy. We've had a lot of questions about some of our recommendations, but you even know, as I do, Amanda, just even before we do a podcast, how long Josh takes with us to make sure that we've got all of our settings correct, and to make sure that we are ready for the podcast. When we started writing this policy, what we did is we took the best practices that were already in the Plan to Protect manual for technology and social media. We took those, but we knew we had to update them because now everyone was doing online engagement with every age group. Then we conducted quite a bit of research as to current practices, some of what our clients were already doing. We went to some tech specialists and companies and got input from them. We reached out to a number of insurance companies, both in the United States and Canada, and asked them what some of their concerns were and what they were advising their clients. So we really did quite a bit of research. I should also remind everyone again that our recommendations for online engagement is based on the understanding and belief that online engagement is a high risk activity. So I want to make sure everyone knows that our recommendations, we do not believe that online engagement is a low risk activity, but rather a high risk activity.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I can't emphasize enough is exactly how much research and how much work goes into the development of these kinds of policies. So that's one of the things that I appreciate is the team of experts that are consulted prior to developing sample policies and procedures and how current and up to date that they actually are. We're not just throwing something together. Every single policy statement we do is done with loads of professional consultation and research to ensure that we are actually providing the absolute best policies and procedures to target exactly what those risks are and how to most effectively avoid them. So, Melody, do some of the tips from last week actually for those high risk activities, would those apply to online engagement?
Yes, many of them do. But this week, I actually have 10 steps to launching and maintaining a safe online programming. So, step number one, do your research. Listen to, observe what young people are doing on social media. Understand who the target audience is, what factors influence their online behavior, and how they prefer to use social media. Speak to the young people and the families directly and test your ideas with them. Research all the different social media platforms, age restrictions, terms and conditions, risks associated with that platform, safety rating, etc. Research what your insurance company requirements are. The insurance companies are very concerned about online engagement. Make sure you check out with your insurance company to ensure that your insurance policy covers online activity. And what do they require for you to have in place? And see if there's any laws that govern the type of activity that you want to do online, and what are the best practices and the etiquette for online engagement. So quite a bit of research goes into this, Amanda.
Absolutely. And there is something that I would like to share. So often, children really aren't aware that information that's being put out onto the internet is actually out there forever. In Canada, we do have different legislation regulating, access to information, also the protection of personal information. But it's not legislation that's like a foolproof document that protects all leaks of personal information, regardless of its disclosure. So if a child or a youth is putting personal information out onto the internet, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to entirely privatize that information. So the personal information that you're putting out is subject to internet hackers, leaks of information, etc. And some companies actually sell personal information for marketing. And here's another issue. There was actually a case study that was done. It's published on the Government of Canada's website. It's called Regulation of the Internet, a Technological Perspective. And essentially, the findings concluded that although there are so many different existing technologies that have been created to actually regulate access to specific content on the internet, such as unacceptable content, none of the approaches of these technologies can actually effectively prevent users from being exposed to unacceptable and inappropriate content. So, regardless of your child's age, your child has access to anything that's on there. We see some social media platforms, they'll put age restrictions when it comes to creating accounts, which sort of acts like a liability waiver for the platform. But there's actually no verification process for that user. So there's no way for the platform to genuinely prove the age of the user. So without knowing that these risks actually exist and be actively working with your children and youth, educating your children and youth, to be ensuring the proper use of the internet, they're exposed to essentially any form of content. They can be negligently sharing personal information, accessing undesirable content, being exposed to the threats of social media to mental health, being exposed to strangers, cyberbullying, information hacks. The list goes on.
Wow, thanks for all that great information. Step number two, develop a business case or a program plan. Similar to what we recommended last week, develop a very clear social media online strategy with achievable goals linked to existing programs of work, ministry, or activity. An online program should be developed to complement your existing activities. So your vision, your mission within your organization, the purposes if you're a charity. Within this strategy, you should set measurable goals and or desired outcomes for your online engagement in order that it can be measured against what your goal is. Like, are you actually achieving that goal? You'll have to consider the cost, the risks, the resources, the people resources that are needed. Consider the timeline. In the first instance, these could include anticipated reach, awareness, and engagement. Does this align with your vision and mission? That's a really important question to ask. And then when you have that plan and you know what your reach is, what your platform is, what your risks are, what the insurance company has provided to you as far as their requirements and their coverage, submit that proposal and secure written approval from your senior leadership and your board to proceed.
So, a lot of what we've been seeing, a lot of organizations are adapting this to kind of look like, well, them using video conferencing on a platform such as Zoom to be hosting that programming because it really can closely mimic in-person programming. But as we already spoke about, it does present a lot of risks, which require a lot of education and a lot of prep work beforehand. So, then what's step 3?
Well, step number 3 is very much answering that question. Can we put Plan to Protect on hold while we do online engagement and combat a pandemic like COVID-19? Step number 3 is no, you cannot. You need to screen and train your team members. Make sure you have the human resources needed to manage this community. Provide supervision and refresh the content often. I just want to give you a quick example of this. I teach Sunday school. I am responsible for grades 5 to 6 in our church that my husband is a pastor in. I have a whole team of volunteers. However, during COVID-19, we haven't been meeting together. We've been doing online children's programming. Half of my team, I'm going to say 3/4 of my team, have not been willing to be videotaped and had their stories and their programming put online. So we needed to recruit new workers to help with the video, the editing of the video, telling some of the lessons, etc. So online engagement requires often more program staff than a classroom does, and it requires ongoing monitoring, supervision, and management to manage those risks, to refresh the content, to keep it fresh, and promote engagement across many different platforms, and control where those videos get posted. Named individuals should hold the responsibility for managing the delivery of the engagement with support from colleagues and program leads. All administrators and program staff involved should be really well screened and trained. Training for online engagement requires add-on content from Plan to Protect. I want to say that again. Training for online engagement requires added content for Plan to Protect. So if you have your volunteers and staff and they've all taken Plan to Protect or abuse prevention training, it did not include the amount of content that is needed for online engagement. So that is why we have added new courses to our school and in our live orientation and refresher trainings to include content for online engagement.
So, just as an FYI for those that are listening, when we're talking about screening and all the steps of screening, we're referring to quite a large list. So, that includes position description, application, interview, references, criminal background checks, training, covenant of care or confidentiality agreement, approval, and supervision and evaluation.
People need to be really reminded more than they need to be instructed. At such a time as this, make sure you remind your workers often the importance of abuse prevention, Plan to Protect policies and procedures. They may have thought, oh, well, we're not meeting together. We can just shelve this, put it on hold for a little while. But no, your workers need to be reminded of the importance of this even at such a time as this. So step number 4 is to create a social focus. Create a social focus that is relevant, fun, and genuinely interested to youth and children. Social media platforms provide the opportunity and the expectation of dialogue. We often say that even with our staff, don't we? We've played games, we've played bingo, we've done different types of activity. So we're just not lecturing during staff meeting, but we're trying to encourage dialogue. So you want engaging content in your social focus. This may be issues of dealing with issues of social justice, faith, vocation, arts, sports, relationships. It can include moral and social discussions and choices, but keeping the social focus topical can increase the relevance of the content that you're dealing with. Remember, we're dealing with a global pandemic, so don't pretend that that is not happening outside of our doors, but talk about it. Establish pre-approved focus list from your leadership. Make sure that if you're not following your regular curriculum, make sure that the leadership within your organization has signed off on approval on the curriculum that you're teaching. And if you're putting it out there and you're making it available to the public, you can tag your conversations with hashtag bullying, hashtag math, hashtag prayer, etc.
So with that being said, ensure that if you're opening up forums for discussion, that these forums are being regularly monitored. But you should also outline what type of communication is acceptable. So if you are covering sensitive topics, as it maybe relates to global affairs, what will be considered appropriate and inappropriate responses? Where will you be drawing the line? Okay, step number 5.
Okay, step number 5 is what platform will you use? We've had a lot of questions about this one. We would recommend that you find a platform that is a safe, preferred platform by the age group and the audience that you are serving. But make sure that you consider the cautions and the risk. By using different social media platforms, you are reaching a wider audience. Content should be tailored, appropriate to that platform. So if you're dealing with really young children, you may want to use something like YouTube, because then parents can be monitoring and watching with their children as if they were watching a television show. However, not all platforms are created equal. Remember that. Not all platforms are created equal. And some platforms pose a much higher risk than others. Remember to do your research associated with the platform that you choose. And this is where we get a lot of questions. At Plan to Protect, along with our insurance company partners and our advisory council, we strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that you only use organization licensed platforms, not personal platforms. Make sure that your organization has platforms in their name and you use those platforms for programs that you are offering as part of your organization, church, school, community center, camp.
Absolutely. And the reason that we highlight using those organization licensed platforms is really a lot for supervision purposes. So if the organization is allowing for personnel to be using their personal accounts to be contacting children and youth, there's really no way to be supervising these unless you're given permission and access to those personal accounts. So using those organization-owned accounts, it facilitates regular monitoring and really accountable use. Okay, so before we continue, I know we've been talking for a very long time. We've covered a lot of content. We are going to pick up the other 5 tips next week. But I don't want to say goodbye until I share with our listeners that this podcast has been sponsored by MessageBox. So, what is MessageBox? It's a personal communication solution designed specifically for charities and businesses. Plan to Protect is partnering with MessageBox to provide a way for you and your staff to be communicating with those that you serve with a much higher level of accountability. MessageBox is a service that allows organizations to use their main phone number to manage conversations with clients or members, sending them text messages as well as messages from the web. MessageBox is really, really easy to use and it helps you stay in touch and can be used to even register attendance during transitioning from COVID-19. Members of Plan to Protect receive basic MessageBox as a member benefit. If you're interested in MessageBox, check it out on our website under partner links. So here's where we're going to close it off for today. I hope you join us next week to hear about those other 5 steps, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Bye, everyone.